So, when you were a kid, did you ever get lost in a store? I remember one trip to the grocery store. I got separated from my mama. I looked back, it seemed only for a second, and then when I looked, she was gone. Her and her fat shopping cart disappeared, and I was so scared and terrified. My imagination took flight, and the aisles of the store, they became endless corridors, and the store itself was a stone-walled castle. The other shoppers, they were buggers hindering my quest for mama. I didn't realize then that the clamminess of my palms and the sweat on my brow was telling about one of my most treasured values. You see, when I was 7, I was told that my mama was sick and that she had to go to the doctor to get better. She was at the doctor a lot, I remember, and it seemed like whenever she came home, she was even sicker. Like whenever she got back from the doctor, she was worse. My family started using new words in our house like chemo and oncologist, and we even had this ceremony in the living room. And I remember it vividly, a big white sheet in the middle of our living room and a bar stool in the middle of that. And I remember sitting there watching as my mom sat in the chair and my dad shaved off her hair. And that was the hardest part for me because I loved to rub my mama's hair. It was always so long and soft, but now it was short and prickly. I had no idea what was going on with my family, no idea the burden that was upon my parents. But I was a happy kid. Nothing had changed when my mama's hair was gone. In my sophomore year of high school, we had another ceremony. It was in the living room again. And I remember they brought us together and they said, "Your mama has cancer again. It's back. It spread to her bones." Now, I remember that my vision started to blur because my eyes were filling up with tears. And I remember how my face squinted into a pitiful frown, and I tried to look up at my mama, but I couldn't because they hadn't delivered the final blow that it was stage 4. Now, I had no idea what this meant. All I knew was that it was hurtful, that it was painful, and that it was bad. An old habit suddenly started to resurface. My parents were in and out of doctor's appointments again, and more new words flooded our house. Proton therapy, medical trials, and Qigong. Now, apparently, cancer had made a home of my mom because in 2018, it decided to inhabit her thyroid too. Now, it wasn't as obnoxious this time, the news, because it was only the 3rd time I'd heard these words. The doctors even found room to call her fortunate because it was a treatable form of cancer, but apparently they had forgotten that she was dying. Church was another thing that came with my mama's first diagnosis. That was when our family started going to church. And church, when I reflect on it, should have been such a strange experience. I mean, singing as a group to some invisible person and closing our eyes and bowing our heads and speaking our wishes to some genie and watching skits out of the biggest book I'd ever seen, the Bible. And despite all this, it rested easily on my heart. In fact, it became an important part of my routine. I learned to love the Bible, the stories in it, and it was the book that ultimately contained my salvation. And ultimately, God became a friend that understood me, and I was trying very hard to understand him. And it was in the middle of my pursuit that my family decided to switch churches, and I was devastated. It felt as if my home had been supplanted by this new, unfamiliar, and unlikely church, and I was in complete rebellion against my family's decision. I felt it was a personal attack against me, and weeks went by and then months, and I revolted and refused to participate in anything that this church had to do. Um, Eventually, I relaxed this facade, and the church experience became fun, and I had friends eventually, but that couldn't last. Happiness could not last, because that was in 2015 when my mom was diagnosed for the second time. Now, the first diagnosis had brought us to Christ. The second brought us apart. It seemed to me that we no longer went to church together in the same car anymore. My dad no longer slept in the same bed as my mom, and we were working. My family was working a lot more. My dad would come home late from work. My mom would lock herself in her study. And again, new words were said. Marriage counseling. Was there a ceremony that I missed? Because all of a sudden I felt anger and sadness, and I spent the better part of high school bouncing between the two of those emotions. In my senior year of high school, I was afforded a couple of opportunities to speak my thoughts to my parents and tell them how I felt about what was going on, but even these moments couldn't fix the past 3 years of suffering. So in my first few weeks at Pepperdine, I journaled 2 realizations. The first, sometimes you have to lose something to gain everything. And the second, with distance comes perspective. I left college in such a rush to begin my life, as the phrase goes. And I did not realize that life would continue just the same for my family back at home while I was off on my adventure. I didn't realize that my mama was going to go into surgery the week I left for college to have her thyroid removed. I didn't realize that 6 weeks after that, she was going to be recovering in bed. I didn't realize that my sister was going to begin her first year of high school while I was gone, and that the next time I would see them, my mama wouldn't be able to walk the campus because she would be too weak. I didn't realize that life was going to be the same for them. I didn't realize. I did not realize that family was the clamminess of my hands and the sweat on my brow when I was lost in that store. I did not realize that family is what allowed us to endure through cancers 1, 2, and 3. I didn't realize that God had family in mind when He afflicted us with the ceremonies and the words. I did not realize that family was what brought us through chemo to God and back again. I didn't realize that family could cause such pain and anger in my heart, and I didn't realize that family would burden me in my first weeks at college. But I realize now that family is my reason for being here.